Hi, Cindy. As always, can you test your mic?
I will, Greg. How are you?
I'm well, and it works. I can hear
Okay.
you.
Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it doesn't. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm gonna go live on LMC TV's YouTube channel right now. So I'm gonna reset my, sorry, my internet. So I may cut out for a moment. The meeting will continue, but I'll be back in a second. I just want to make sure I have a strong connection to the meeting. change the permission so you can turn your video on when you please.
I have 7 o'clock. We're missing John. Is it Greg?
Sorry? What was that, Kathy?
I was wondering if John was in the waiting room.
Let me check again. He is not.
Okay, well, it's 7 o'clock.
Happy last meeting, Greg.
Oh, I was
Thank
just going
you.
to say that.
Sorry, Chair, sorry.
Happy for Greg, not for us.
I'll have
Wednesday,
other meetings.
27th, this is a meeting of the Village of Mamaroneck Planning Board, and we're marking the occasion of our soon-to-be former village planner, Greg Cutler's final meeting with us. So we'll make it a memorable one.
I don't know if I want
we
that.
We also want to make sure that we express our concerns to everyone watching, that you and yours are safe and sound as we have surpassed the 100,000 mark of deaths in the United States in the last 11 or 12 weeks. So let's move through the agenda. First item on the agenda is a review of minutes from our April 6th special meeting, which was a work session on the Hampshire application. So it was April 6, 2020, and I will open this up to the members of the board. Comments or questions about the minutes? All 19 pages of them.
Yeah, 19 pages is not a lot of fun to either create or read. So maybe when we get back to in-person meetings, we can go back to action minutes. But I have a couple of typos, nothing major.
Okay,
Page 2, the last sentence.
Yeah.
I think we're missing a word take. I think with the time it would take the mature trees to grow.
got it.
Okay, and page 12, in the middle of the page, my comment talking about I would only add in paragraph 8. At the end of that line, I would add golf, comma, it's a social tennis swimming club.
Got it.
And then on page 15, my last comment, I think the word wordsmith should be wordsmithed with an ED
Okay.
on the end of it. And otherwise, that's all I had.
Not bad.
I have nothing.
Okay.
Anybody else have anything? And since the gang's all here, John's not involved, we can assume then that's it. So I need a motion to approve the minutes of April 6th, 2020.
So moved.
Second. Let's just do a group vote here. All in favor? Please mute yourselves. Lou and Richard, you're both muted. We need to take a vote.
Can you hear me now?
We can
You hear
hear
me?
you. Yes.
Good.
All in favor of the approving the minutes, please say aye.
Hi.
Any opposed? Nay. Okay. All right, let's get to the next item on the agenda, which is a open public hearing for a wetlands permit. And also we're considering a site plan and a floodplain variance for One Shore Road. Now, for the applicant, this has been a long process. but we are now at the end. HCZM has granted full consistency to the project last week. So unless anybody from the board has any questions of the applicant, we have 3 solutions in front of us. So the public hearing is open. So let's see if anyone has any questions. Does anybody want the applicant to clarify anything? No? Before we close the public hearing, I have to ask one last time, are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this application? Raise your hand, please. Where did Greg go? Did we lose him?
I'm here.
Okay.
There
you
I'm
are.
not seeing it. I'm not seeing any members of the public raise their hand.
Okay, this has not garnered a lot of public comment.
Good evening, Madam Chair. This is Kristen Motel on behalf of the applicant. I'm here in case there are any remaining questions of the board. As you're aware, we received consistency review and the marine structures permit last week from Harbor Coastal. So tonight, as you mentioned, we have the 3 resolutions before you for the floodplain variance, the site plan, and requested wetlands permit.
Glad you're in agreement with that.
Yes,
All right, we're all on the same page.
very good.
Do you have any other comments that they want to make before we close the public hearing? No? Motion then to close the public hearing for One Shore Road. The
Hello?
is open for the wetlands permit. Now Richard should be muted. Greg, can you mute him? Thank you.
I did that for him. Yep.
Thank you. Okay. So the public hearing is on the wetlands permit. So I need a motion to close the public hearing for the wetlands permit.
So moved.
I need a
I'll
second.
second. I'm here, Kathy.
Oh, hi, John. Hi.
How are you?
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, I got a little lost in the internet land there.
Oh, yeah. We gave you a few minutes, but since we didn't need you for the first item on the agenda anyway, because it was Hampshire minutes, we decided to start.
Oh, good. Okay.
Okay. All right. So all in favor, let me call the voice vote of closing the public hearing on One Shore Road. Cindy?
Yes.
Lou?
Yes.
Richard?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Public hearing is now closed. So we have 3 resolutions. Let's start with site plan approval, because that's on top of my pile. Since the draft was sent out to you, there was one typo. Page 3. Pages, the enumerated list of documents submitted, numbers 28 to 34 were duplicative and superseded by numbers 1 through 7, so that was removed. And the whereas clause at the bottom of that page about SHPO was expanded slightly to reflect what actually happened. I will read the new language that Ms. Mason helped us with this afternoon. Whereas the State Historic Preservation Office determined that the site is eligible for listing on the State Historic Register. And the Planning Board has determined, based on statements made by the applicant and his architect regarding changes made to the project plans in order to make the addition more in line with the historic features of the original house, that the project design is in line with the historic features of the property and will not negatively impact the historic value of the property. Everybody okay with that? Okay.
Yes.
Ms. Motel, you're good with that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I think we still have a numbering issue. We go from 27 to 35, but that can be corrected on the,
Yeah.
So
I learned something new today. Go ahead, Ms. Mason.
Kathy brought that up as well, but
oh,
it numbers automatically. So once I remove those numbers, it'll align correctly.
I love that about computers. Okay.
Me too.
Right.
Made my job much easier.
How to do auto numbering, which a lot of people don't know how to do. To correct a document the other day, and it was not auto numbered. Okay, so anybody have any other comments about this particular resolution to approve the site plan? No? Okay, So I need a motion to approve the site plan.
So moved.
Second?
Okay, I'm going to reverse the order that I see on the screen and start with Mr. Verney.
Yes.
Mr. Littman,
Yes.
Mr. Mendez,
Yes.
Ms. Goldstein,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Okay, that's one. Next, we have the wetlands permit approval. And this too had the duplicate numbering, the duplicate listing, so that was corrected. And there was also a correction made to the page 4. And I did not print out this correction, so Ms. Mason, I'm going to toss you the ball.
Okay, sorry, I'm on one small laptop, so I have to shift back.
We wanted to reflect the fact that AHCZM took 2 votes.
Yeah, and that's correct. Thank you, Kathy, for that. So we added a whereas clause that says, whereas on April 1st, 2020, the Harbor and Coastal Zone Management Commission, the commission, determined that any portions of the project that do not require a marine structures permit are consistent with the village's local waterfront revitalization program, the LWRP, in accordance with chapter 240 of the village code. And we edited the following resolution to say that whereas on May 20, 2020, the commission determined that the remaining portions of the project are consistent with the village's LWRP in accordance with chapter 20 of the village code.
Thank you. We didn't have it on the fly, so it took a little time this afternoon. Anybody have any problems with those changes? Ms. Motel, are they good with you?
Yes, they are. Thank you.
Okay. Any member of the planning board have any comments on the, on the resolution, draft resolution? Nope. We've got good ones here. Okay, I need a motion to approve the resolution for the wetlands permit.
So moved.
Second?
Okay, I sensing a trend here. Okay, let's take a vote on the resolution to approve the wetlands permit. Ms. Goldstein,
Yes.
Mr. Mendez,
Yes.
Mr. Littman,
Yes.
and Mr. Verney,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Okay, now on the last one, we have a resolution to grant a variance from a requirement in our floodplain code to allow a relatively small amount of fill to be placed in the floodplain. And here too, we had the change with the list of documents. Other than that, the resolution stayed the same as it was amended by Ms. Mason earlier today. I think that happened today. My days get confused these days. Does anybody have any comments or questions about this resolution?
No.
Look like it. No. Okay, I need a motion then to approve the floodplain variance.
So moved.
Second?
3 for 3.
I didn't want to break up the rhythm.
We're gonna have to mix this up here. Okay, let's start with Mr. Littman. How do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Mendez,
Yes.
Ms. Goldstein,
Yes.
Mr. Verney,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Okay, Shore Road.
Thank-
You are done.
Thank you.
Did you do the wetland permit?
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was number
Thank you
2.
very much. Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you.
You're
Good luck.
welcome. Good luck.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
The governor opened up construction as of yesterday.
I know that you all timed that with the governor, so I appreciate that.
I called him up personally.
Thank you so much. Be well. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Okay. Let me get rid of my Shore Road pile, which is substantial. Okay. Next on the agenda is 139 East Prospect Avenue. We have a public hearing open on this item as well. Tonight's issue is the secret determination. They are before the planning board for a site plan approval and a special permit. We are at the very beginning of the process until we make a determination for SEQA. They can't move forward with HCZM. They've gone to HCZM for some reason. But if we can make a secret determination tonight, we will. So I understand we have a presentation by Mr. Cutler tonight, but first are you here for this application as well?
Yes, I am. Just for the record,
Just have
Kristen
to,
Motel from
Aren't you happy you can do this from home?
I am. Yes, Kristen Motel from the law firm Cuddy and Fader for the applicant Palladium Management. It's our understanding that we are on this agenda tonight so Greg can present his visual model to you. As you're aware, we have not submitted a supplemental submission requesting to be on this agenda. We do plan to submit supplemental materials addressing comments received. So, we would ask that any substantive discussion at this time be tabled to when we make the next submission. But we are interested in and looking forward to Greg's presentation. So we understand that's why we're on the agenda this evening.
Okay. Okay. Does anybody want to make any comments, or shall we look at Mr. Cutler's 3D digital model of the building and how it sits on the site vis-a-vis its surroundings?
Sure, I'll set that up, but I did want to mention before I get started that you did receive a letter from the fire department regarding this application.
That's true. I should have mentioned that. We received a letter from the fire chief to our, based on an inquiry that we made to see how they felt about it. I think the fire inspector wanted to meet perhaps with the applicant, or was that the chief and the inspector? He didn't mention it here in the letter. This is the chief.
I believe that was the inspector. Oh, go on.
He was the inspector. But the chief did say, with regards to the access behind the building, there's a driveway to the right of the property when facing the building, and that right of way for the fire department allows them to get to the rear of the buildings on Mamaroneck Avenue. So that's a very important access point for the fire department, not only for the buildings that are on Prospect Avenue, but for the back of the buildings on Mamaroneck Avenue. Chief Primrose has expressed concern that right now that driveway is about as narrow as it can possibly be and allow access. And so any narrowing of it would be a real problem. And although he doesn't mention it, any widening of it might be helpful. That's without saying. So we'll just put that out there. Everybody member on the board has seen this, and this letter has been posted on the record on the village website.
Ms. Chair, if I may, our traffic consultant has been in touch with the fire chief. There is no proposed narrowing of that access way. There was an error on our plans. We're not proposing any sort of encroachment or further narrowing of the access way. And the traffic consultant, Carlito Holt, he is with us tonight. If there's any further questions, we'll be addressing the fire comments and our supplemental submission as well.
Okay. You had mentioned at one of our earlier meetings that there was no plans to narrow.
Correct.
Yeah, in my conversations with the fire chief, he expressed that, and I called the applicant to make sure that that was indeed the case.
Okay.
So whenever you're ready, if you want me to start, I can
I
start.
think we're ready, and we're waiting with bated breath.
Okay.
This is why we're going to miss you, Greg.
Okay. Can you just confirm that my screen is being shared?
Yes,
You can see it.
Okay.
your screen is
So
being shared, but you might want to, can you make the image the only thing on the screen? No, there you go.
I can make it as big as I can.
Okay.
All right. That's well, maybe I can go. No. Yeah, this is as big as it's gonna get.
Okay.
So this is the proposed building. They provided me with this model. They also provided this model, which it doesn't show this portion of the building coming out, but I don't think that has any substantive effect upon the view sheds. And they provided this kind of boxy model for that building. I had already had the Regatta modeled out. I made a few corrections on it to make it a little more in line with what's actually happening there. The heights are accurate, the balcony locations are accurate, and the heights are accurate. But I say that with a grain of salt because, you know, when you're modeling something, there's always going to be some degree of inaccuracy. So it may be off by 1 or 2 feet on a horizontal plane, but I did check these individually on a vertical plane, and all the balconies on the vertical plane are accurate to what their surveyor had shown in the survey that indicated the heights of each balcony. So this is pretty much it. I've saved several bookmarked locations so you can see how the building is you know, kind of addresses the environment from different locations. I also wanted to point out that since I had a rendering of 172 East Prospect, I thought it would make sense to keep that in to show what the full build out would be in light of this approved or slash still in process application here because they are before the ZBA right now. So we'll see what happens with that. I also, sorry, before I get into the different view sheds, I did want to show that I have also modeled out the existing building. Not to the greatest degree of accuracy, but the height should be pretty close, and at least the footprint is correct. So this footprint should be accurate. So you can kind of look at the delta when I get to some of the different view sheds that I'll be showing you. So with that, start with the Mamaroneck Avenue. So this is the view from Mamaroneck Avenue. The building is right here. That is the proposed building. That's the top. This is the top of the Regatta. This is the print shop at the bottom of the street. And this is Doc James. I'll get to the balconies then towards the end. Tompkins Bridge. This is the view from Tompkins Bridge. Obviously, there's no vegetation in this model, so I just want to point that out. I don't think there's much vegetation from this viewpoint anyway, but when I go to across the river, there would be vegetation in between here. Obviously, in the winter, it would be a little more bare, but in the summer, it would be foliage would be more full. Okay. This is the view from Prospect, about halfway down the hill. Doc James, the building. This is basically if you're in the parking lot at the end of Prospect, this is the view from there. From Phillips Park Road, you can't even see the building because of 172. It completely blocks the view from Phillips Park Road. And let's go to it says third balcony, but this is actually top balcony. And this is, just for frame of reference, this is this balcony right here.
Which balcony?
Which balcony?
This one right here. Do you see my mouse? Do you see
Oh, the
No.
mouse is stuck up in the corner. So, oh, okay.
So that's the view. Actually, I may be off. I'm sorry. I apologize. That's actually, I apologize. It's this balcony. So the second from the top.
Oh, the second from the top.
So that's the view. This is the second from the bottom, which I'll be going to now. And also just for frame of reference, I'll put that existing building on so you can kind of see the delta. And then the lowest balcony. Now I'll try and kind of stay on this plane and show, you know, this is what it would be like from one balcony to the right. And sorry, the zooming won't give me, but you can get a sense of what it would be at the closest balcony. This is roughly the sense of what it would be. On the lowest balcony that's closest, and I'll zoom out to kind of show what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about this one right here, right there. So it's kind of showing where the existing building goes back a little bit further in this location. And it's pretty much flush with the edge here on the new proposed building. Or I guess maybe not flush actually. It's a little bit forward in this section. Apologies. So that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, if you'd like to look at it from a certain angle, you know, let me know. It's not visible from sound in any way because the regatta is, and I apologize for not putting the windows back here. There are windows and balconies on this side. I was just trying to focus my attention.
Greg, could I see the existing building and the proposed building where the driveway is to the right when you face the lot? So the 14, or whatever the narrowest point there is actually where the existing building is?
Back here.
Okay, that's
So it's
helpful.
between these two buildings. And again, so the placement is not going to be 100% on a horizontal plane. I did my best to match it up, but you also have to be aware that this aerial has some issues with it too, because it's taken at an angle. So like, as you can see here, this is the top of the regatta and it's off by a good 25 feet here. And that's just because of the angle of the aerial. Yeah, I can show you. You can see how it's 25 feet on this edge. You
Oh.
can see the side of the building. So it gets kind of, it gets tough to really find the true location of things, but I did put the site plan, actually I can show you here. I put the site plan and I referenced it and I use this as a reference to try and make it a little more true. When I did the model.
What's the gray material below that it looks like the proposed new building is crossing over onto? Is that, it looks like a piece of roof from one of the pictures you showed, but what is the gray material with the white units on it?
I'm not sure what you're talking, on this proposed building?
No, behind it. It looks like the building's sitting on either a roof or a deck.
Oh yeah, that's the
Looks like a
existing
deck.
building.
What is that?
From the existing building?
No, from the, in front of the regatta. The gray material in front of the regatta.
Right here?
Yes.
Oh, that's the roof of the regatta. I was just trying to show that the regatta's true location is actually about 25 feet back because, as you can see when I turn off all the layers, you can see that this is about 25 feet of distortion of the image. So these are all the balconies on the other side of the building. And if it was the true, like, if you were looking down and it was truly capturing it like head on, there wouldn't be any distortion here. So that's why the regatta looks like it's sitting in a different location than it would be on the aerial, because this is distorted so much. But the true location of the regatta is actually where I put it here.
Okay. So it's not sitting on a deck, which is really representation of the roof above, but we can see how close it is in proximity to that corner with both the balconies and the other portion of the building.
Yeah, this is how close it would be, roughly.
And how close is that?
I'll let the applicant answer that because I don't have it in front of me.
I can, if Greg, if you want to share my screen. This is Rex Gedney. Good evening, everyone. The project architect.
All right, let me promote you to panelist, and I'll stop my sharing. You should be able to share your screen now.
Do you see that? Are you able to see that?
Yes.
Okay. So we did just 3 distance analysis with the work of the surveyor, the ground floor, the second floor, and the third floor, just to kind of give you, points. So, the closest point would be as shown here. It's 19 feet 2 inches, 2.5 inches to the rear, and 8 feet 2 inches to the side.
That seems accurate to the modeling that I did.
And that's on the lowest level. And then as you go up, you see the second floor, you see where the balconies are. And then we did a relationship between balcony to balcony and then balcony to bed to corner of the building. So it gives you those distances as well.
And are there no side yard or rear yard requirements?
There are not.
There are not.
Yeah, so I just measured in the model, and it's showing 9 feet. So it's off by a foot, just so you know, at that 8 foot 2 inch location.
Rex, are there any lot line windows on the, I guess what would be the eastern face there?
There are none. There are none on the side, either side, which would be east, or actually we're calling that north and south. The 2 sides, there are no windows there at all.
Is that because the distances don't provide enough room for it? Because you have to have a certain amount for fire safety?
That is correct.
I think the question of the rear yard is yet to be fully figured out. We've certainly gotten public comment about the multiple dwellings law and whether or not it applies to this site. I think that's still a question. I'm troubled by the closeness, seeing it this way, and maybe when we get to a point, I'd like to look at the site and maybe the applicant could just put a few flags in the ground, generally where the building would go. I think, Greg, your models are great, but I think I need to understand more about the actual location. And I know these are off a little bit.
If you're still looking at my screen, what I pulled up as shown in red is the actual, that's the existing building, and that's from the existing survey. And then we overlaid our building in relationship to that. So as it pertains to the rear, we are, and actually there are structures, there's a concrete walk and other things which are not on our property at this point, but our building is clearly further away, and that was represented in Greg's model as he compared the existing and then superimposed the proposed building over top of that. Additionally, and we want to be clear, certainly with the fire department, that there are, encroachments here that are in the easement that will be eliminated because our building will be further back. So this diagram is very useful for looking at what is there versus what is proposed.
That is very helpful. I guess though there is a difference in the height between the proposed building and the existing building.
Yes, there are.
Okay, so maybe that's that's some of the issue of the compressed looking space between the buildings.
Well, it's also height and also the shape of the building. The existing building isn't a big square box. So, square boxes tend to look bulkier because they are. Okay. All right. All right. And this was very interesting to be able to visualize it. Is there any reason why this would have any impact on any secret determination? I don't think so. So obviously, we will continue working with this applicant on the site plan and on the permit. Does anybody have any comments on this?
I just think we need to clear up the zoning issue of the rear yard before we go too much further, or before the applicant goes too much further. So, I mean, I would think that the zoning board could give us an interpretation of zoning code, because I don't think that's our job.
Yeah,
I believe corporate counsel, and both Greg and I believe your corporate counsel rendered the decision on that.
Yes, it's not their
Sorry,
purview.
who's speaking?
yes. So the applicant could choose to go for an interpretation, but the building inspector has done his zoning compliance at this point. So, no.
Well,
Greg, if I could comment here, Ms. Goldstein, you can go ahead.
no, go ahead, please.
I respectfully, it's our position. The planning board, as you mentioned, doesn't really have any interpretive authority here. And the issue really is closed because the building inspector's memo and interpretation on this dated January 6th, anytime to challenge that determination would have been brought by March 6th. Since that time has passed, there's really no further challenge that can be made. This has been raised multiple times. It's my understanding, 3 different professionals have weighed in here, the village's attorney, the building inspector, the planner, everyone's in alignment that the multiple dwellings law is not applicable to this project and in this instance. Furthermore, if there's any ambiguity as to this, it has to be weighed in favor of the applicant. So we really think there's nothing else to address. That this issue's been raised, and at this point, it's been addressed. There's nothing else.
I understand what you're saying. I do understand that the acting building inspector has stated that he has not looked at the multiple dwellings law. So I think we have a huge oversight problem if that's the case. And again, I'll just say, it's the zoning board that interprets zoning code with any kind of authority. Everybody else has an opinion, but they are the authority on our zoning laws. So if this has somehow slipped through when it shouldn't have, I would just like to know that as we look at other applications in the future. And I do think that the planning board can request an interpretation by the zoning board. I don't think the applicant has to go get that necessarily, but I would like our council to take a look at that. Again, if it's just to inform our future review of plans and applications, I think that's a worthwhile exercise.
Sure, if the board would like that, we can look into it.
I think that's helpful.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. I know.
And so in particular, you'd like us to look as to whether the planning board can request
I'd like to go a little further than that. I'd like to know the application of the multiple dwellings law, and if on other applications, is that part of the code being somehow overlooked?
Okay, I see what you're saying. So
I-
in general, how
Something
are we
more
applying-
comprehensive, yes.
Right.
Please.
How are we applying the multiple dwellings law in general, and
Right.
whether the planning board is able to request an
Right,
interpretation?
and if this one slipped through the crack, if it is applicable and it slipped through the cracks, we need to know that. And if it isn't applicable, I'd like to know why.
And also, I think, Christy, you should also look into, sorry, I'm going to make a suggestion here, whether a variance could be sought from the multiple dwellings law. Because
Again,
it's
The
not in
board
zoning.
agrees.
If the board agrees, yeah.
If
Just
the
a
board agrees.
suggestion to the board.
That sounds good to me.
Yeah, this all sounds good. It's very mushy right now. I mean, but for the building inspector, the acting building inspector, to make a statement that he doesn't review and apply that law, I think puts us sort of in a bind that we need to get a little bit more information before we say with certainty that it's zoning compliant. If he didn't look at that before he determined it was zoning compliant, then how can we say it's zoning compliant? So we're talking about our attorney looking at the multiple dwellings law. How is it being applied in the Village of Mamaroneck? And is it indeed being overlooked and not being applied? Can or should the planning board request an interpretation on the law from the zoning board on this particular application? Can a variance be requested or be made if decided this does apply? And if it's not being applied or doesn't apply, we need to understand why, just to educate us for the future as well.
Understood.
I'd also,
Summary of what we just said. I'm taking notes, so I want to make sure that what we just said.
I think that's it, but if anybody else has any comments.
I would just like to know which takes precedence, the multiple dwelling law or the zoning. And-
I believe it's whichever is the stricter provision, correct, Greg?
I'm not going to say that with any authority.
Okay,
Yeah, but that.
fair enough.
We should really know, because I'd prefer to make the decision based on facts.
Mhm.
Silly
We'll
you.
do an analysis.
You need facts. Yeah, next you'll be asking for science.
Yeah, it's a voluminous law, and I don't think that proper care was put into reviewing every section of this law and really determining if there was a way to really enforce it administratively. When it was adopted, it was really about, again, I've said this before, it was really about, having peepholes on your door and having lighting outside, and there was no talk of potentially superseding our zoning. So I think the law in general should probably be looked at.
But here's the problem. It's on the books. We have to deal with it one way or another. And if we need to make a recommendation to the Board of Trustees that they need to take a look at this because it's a problem, then I guess we can do that. But in the meantime, it's with us.
Yeah,
And
and I would
you are
suggest that, and just so you know, it is on our list of things that need to be changed in the code, and it's been on that list since 2017. So
Okay, Greg, you can't leave until it's done. How about that?
Yeah, you're stuck here. You didn't finish your list of things to do.
I know.
All right.
I think Ms. Mason's correct, though. You can make a local law more restrictive than the state law, but you can't make it less restrictive than the state law. So whichever is more restrictive is a general rule of thumb on which law applies. So if the state law is more restrictive, then that would be the one that would apply. If it applies in this circumstance.
Right.
Right.
Okay. Mr. Cutler, do you have a recommendation? And maybe Mr. Gedney can remove the image from his screen.
Certainly.
We can see, yeah, now we can see people. Thank you. Okay. One of the things we want to try to accomplish tonight is to make a secret determination. Mr. Cutler, do you have a recommendation? Or did you make one to us already?
I have provided a draft negative declaration for your consideration. So based on that, you would have to, have I've felt as though you've taken a hard look at this application and that there would be no significant adverse environmental impacts based on what's before you. And you'd have to be comfortable with the information that you have and that it addresses all of those potential significant adverse environmental impacts.
And Mr. Cutler shared that document with the board yesterday. Is there
Good.
comments or questions about neg decking this particular application?
I kind of think, as Ms. Goldstein said, first we have to get the answer to whether or not the multiple dwelling law applies, and then we can get to that, because it's going to have a big impact on whether or not there needs to be rear yards and side yards in this. And so I think that impacts on whether or not we neg deck it, because obviously there's view shed considerations here that are significant. And given the images we just saw, I think that's significant, and the interpretation of that law is going to be significant in, I think, how I feel about it.
I agree with Mr. Verney. I'm not ready to proceed tonight.
Yeah, the applicant, as I indicated earlier, has a forthcoming supplemental submission that's going to address some of these items. So we would ask for you to review those supplemental materials when they are received.
Okay, it sounds like, again, we're all on the same page. We're going to hold this over, the secret determination. But meanwhile, this is an open public hearing. And once again, if there are any members of the public who would like to speak on this issue, add any new information or new comments, we've been receiving emails. We have those emails. I think we understand the concern from the neighbors. But if anybody would like to address the planning board tonight, or if you want to wait for the supplemental materials, I think we're open to either one.
We have Bridget McGraw. You are on.
Please state your name
Can you
and
hear me?
We can hear you.
Hear me? Yes. So my name is Bridget McGraw, and I live at 123 Mamaroneck Ave, apartment 302. I sent an email to Betty Ann Schurer tonight stating my opinion. I could read it if you want. I don't necessarily feel that I need to, because I could hear from the conversation that you're taking the concerns that I raised about the multiple dwelling law into account. I just wanted to be on the record that I think that law needs to be applied. This is an 8-unit building, so it appears to me that multiple dwelling law would apply.
okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Again, please raise your hand if you'd like to speak. Okay. Lucia,
Please state your full name.
you're on.
Just to unmute herself.
Oh, unmute. Okay.
It'd be nice to go back to having meetings in person.
I agree.
Okay, you should be able to speak now.
Please state your full name. Lucia, can you hear us? I don't know her last name. She's down as Lucia, no?
Let me see if I can find the call-in number for her to call. Yeah.
Technical problems here. There's always at least one.
Let's see. Give me 1 moment.
Chair, the email that was sent in by Bridget McGraw was forwarded to the board during the meeting. So you will have it in your inbox already.
Thank you.
Having trouble finding the invite. Hold on, I gotta go check one more place. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen with the phone number that you can call. So you can call in, okay? You see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so here's the number you can call. And then once you get on, it will ask you for this number. You should have this prepared beforehand. My apologies.
Oh, you'll have to come back next time to do this.
Yeah.
You can do it remotely.
We're gonna teach you. We're gonna teach you all night.
Yeah, I think they have meetings on the same night, so.
Sure they do.
Okay, so I'm covering it. So Lucia, if you could just call that number here and plug in the meeting ID, I'll unmute you.
I did send her the link, the connecting link that I sent to the board as well.
Okay, I think, oh, she was there for a second, or someone was there for a second, they called in. Maybe there's another member of the public who wants to speak. Oh, here's a number. Okay.
I'm here.
Okay, we can hear
Okay.
you. If you could just
Okay.
mute your computer though, because it's echoing.
Yeah, hold on.
Thank you.
Is that any better?
No.
Oh,
Can you hear me now? Greg?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Okay, hi, this is Lucia, real fast. Sorry about this, guys. Lucia Tadavito from the Regatta. Just to let you know, I do sit on the Board of Commissions, and just, you know, we all attended the first planning board meeting, and we just want to make sure that our concerns and our voices were heard. And you know, we you know, like, you guys don't want us to keep repeating the same old stuff over and over, and you know, hopefully we won't, but we're really, you know, have some concerns with the, you know, the closeness to most of the residents on our side of the building. So we just want to make sure that, you know, all our documents that were presented at the first meeting will, you know, be taken into consideration. That's it.
I have a question, Lucia. When you said
Yes, I'm here.
when you said you sit on the Board of Commission, is that the condo board?
No, the
Oh,
board
the traffic.
of
You're
traffic, I'm
you're
sorry.
okay. You're on the
Tra-
traffic
yeah.
commission.
I'm
Okay.
on the traffic commission. Sorry about that.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Thank you very much
you.
for all you guys do. Appreciate it.
All right. We've got Glenn. You should be able to speak.
Good evening, board.
Hi, Glenn.
Quickly, I'm for the project. I believe we do have a shortage in Mamaroneck of apartments, especially apartments, the one-bedroom units that can either be used by those who are 55 and older as they start to sell their houses to have units, or starter units for younger people. This isn't a huge project. I do think that, you know, the regatta residents do have a point about the closeness, but I don't think it's an overwhelming project. And just on a personal note, to Cindy, you go, girl. I'm with you all the way, and I meant it from the heart what I said this afternoon. Take care.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you.
For the record, that's Glenn Tippett. He was a frequent flyer, so we kind of know him. Very nice. Anybody else want to speak?
I am not seeing any more names.
Okay. Want to take down your screen share then so we can see faces again? Okay. When we were discussing sort of how to proceed, just myself and Greg and Christy and Mr. Sposino, who's not with us tonight, we were talking about perhaps it would be a good idea to have the applicant meet with some members of or homeowners in the regatta, either the condo board or whoever the regatta residents would like to represent them. Mr. Sposino, I think I'm not speaking for him, but Greg and Chrissy were both there. He did offer to mediate or to work with the two groups. I don't know if that would be something that the applicant would be willing to do. Kristen, is that something that you would consider? We can maybe try to set something up.
I can certainly confer with our client and be in touch with Ms. Mason regarding discussions with the regatta.
Okay, that would be good. As we're moving along with our other things, this might be something that try to alleviate some fears and be good neighbors and get to know one another and listen to their concerns, and they can listen to what the applicant has to say. I do want to reiterate that this planning board must follow the laws, and we will determine whether the multiple dwellings law applies, but for the most part, the project, something it will be allowed by the code, by the laws to be built there. So we'll work on it and work with everyone and come up with a solution, but the applicant does have a right to build something there. And so, you know, when we get letters saying, how could you possibly consider something, we consider it because the law allows it. And we are bound to follow the law. Okay, so we're going to keep the public hearing open. We're not going to do the secret determination, and we have a few things that we're going to be working on. Okay.
Thank you.
Say anything else on this particular application? We're done for tonight.
Thank you very much. Greg, thanks for all your help over the years. Best of luck.
Good luck to you, Greg. We'll see you.
Yeah, you'll see him as
Yeah. Thank you.
okay. All right, the next item on the agenda is also a public hearing is open. We have a site plan review and a special permit, a public hearing open on 355 Phillips Park Road. Tonight, if possible, or we're going to discuss, we probably won't come to any determination, but we're going to discuss also the secret determination for this project as well. So we're switching people who are promoted.
Good evening.
Good evening. Do you have anything to present to the board tonight?
Yes, Chair. I'll just briefly do a quick overview of our submission, and then we can certainly as to the direction. So for the record, Christy Adana from Silverberg Zelantis, also here this evening. We have Robert Stanziel, the architect, Michael Stein, the engineer, Dominic Brescia for the applicant. We also have a couple of new friends with us this evening, Carlito Holt, who's our traffic engineer, and Beth Evans, our wetlands consultant. I hope you're all doing well this evening. The last time we were before you was about a month ago on April 22nd. And based upon the comments we received from this board and the board's consultants, we did make a supplemental submission in advance of this meeting, which included a traffic and site distance study prepared by Mr. Holt, which determined that there would be adequate site distance and that the number of new trips generated would be nominal. Revised plans and a memo from Mr. Stein responding to Mr. Hildebrand's comments. Revised architectural plans from Mr. Stanzial. A memo from our landscape architect, Earl Govin, responding to the comments by Ms. Oakley. And a revised short EAF prepared using the EAF mapper function. We also submitted materials that were in response to the HCZM memo that was submitted to this board, which included a letter from Ms. Evans opining that the property does not contain nor is it adjacent to wetlands. We also provided some additional renderings of the proposed project from some additional viewpoints. And we also reached out to SHPO based upon the HCZM's comments and included determinations from SHPO that the existing structure is not eligible for listing on Historic Register and that SHPO has no concerns regarding the proposed project. We also submitted these materials to HCZM in anticipation of appearing before them at their May 20th meeting. However, after making the submission, we were advised that the HCZM chair had directed that we not return to them until this board as lead agency had made a determination with respect to SECREP. So in light of the application materials and the supplemental materials we submitted, we believe that we have demonstrated that there is not the potential for any significant adverse environmental impacts from this project. And we ask that the board consider adopting or directing the preparation of a negative declaration for your adoption. And given everything that we submitted, I will defer to the board as to any questions or comments you may have of me or any of our other consultants who are available this evening.
Thank you very much. I know there's a few issues with regards to this application, and we did get this supplemental submission. I'm going to ask any member of the board if they have any questions or comments with regards to any of the new information. I know, Mr. Verney, you had asked about the traffic and the sites and whatnot, and we did get a traffic study from the engineer. Site distance, covering site distance. So does anybody have anything they want to clarify or give additional information?
If we could just ask Ms. Adana to, I mean, HCZMC doesn't write us a lot of memos, but they wrote us a very strong one here, and granted it was a month ago. But if you could just kind of summarize and discuss why, you know, the points that they brought up, because they urged a pause deck on this. So I don't want to do a neg deck until I understand that everything they raised has been addressed or, you know, needs to be addressed. Could you just, I mean, there's a bunch of bullet items on their April 20th memo, and I think it would be really helpful if you could just go through that and summarize.
On the first page, is that what you're referring to, Ms. Goldstein?
I mean, there's also some comments on the,
Sure.
go on to the second page. So some of them seem to be the same, but.
Right, absolutely. And we did make this submission to HCZM, and we intended to go back, but they directed us to come to you first. But that being said, the issue of the elements being within 50 feet of a water body, I believe that refers to the proposed retaining wall. We are currently working off of the two determinations that have been issued by the building inspector, which were actually attached to my supplemental submission to this board for your review this evening. And they both determined, the second of which I believe was dated March 30th and was directly with respect to the 50-foot setback. And his determination was that it did not increase the degree of non-compliance because the structure is already located within the 50-foot setback. And with the exception of the retaining wall, which is intended to level out the site in order to provide beneficial amenities to the village in the form of bike racks that will be available to the public, as well as permeable pavers, we will only be expanding over the building in the portion that is outside of the 50-foot setback. So we don't have to keep the retaining wall there, but the building inspector's determination to date has been that it does not increase the degree of nonconformity, and therefore it is zoning compliant as far as I understand it. And so given that that is going to be done for the benefit of the village, we were not inclined to revise the plans without direction from the building inspector.
Okay, I understand that, but I'm not talking zoning compliance here. I'm talking, there are elements of this application that are happening within 50 feet of a water body. And I think there was one reference to a sewer line, and that seems to be resolved, but there's still work being done within 50 feet of a water body with or without zoning compliance. So, but that's true. There is work being done, project elements within 50 feet of a water body, well, whether beneficial to the village, like a bike rack or not.
Well, that is zoning compliance because that requirement is in the zoning code. So I'm not sure how, if the building inspector is saying it's zoning compliant, then that's what we're going off of.
Well, there are elements of doing work in and near a river that go speak to other issues rather than zoning. So I think that's what HCZMC was getting at, but.
Well, the applicant fully intends to comply with all best construction management practices to ensure that there's no impacts during construction. And Ms. Evans can hopefully speak to this as she did in her letter. I think part of the concern that HCZM had was their interpretation that it was either, the property is either on or adjacent to a wetland, and that's not the case. So that was another one of the items that the HCZM had raised, and that's why we consulted with Ms. Evans in her expert capacity in order to provide clarity on that.
So definitely I'd love to hear from Ms. Evans, because I guess then the definition of a water body is not a wetland. So we'll get to that, and I know that's her area of expertise. So there are a couple of other questions talking about that. So we can, I know you've handled the SHPO issue. That was another thing they brought up. The eligible historic structure dealt with that. What about the coastal assessment form checked yes for potential negative impacts? Has that form either been revised or those impacts identified?
I would have to go back and look. I think some of what the commission was relying upon was their interpretation of some of the issues. To the extent that there are any potential impacts, I think they're certainly going to be mitigated from this project, which, as Mr. Stein can speak to, and Ms. Evans probably, it is going to improve existing conditions, because currently there is no stormwater management or any sort of drainage system on the property, and this is going to improve that.
Understood. On the short EAF, though, box 13 talks about, would the proposed action physically alter or encroach into any existing wetland or water body, and the box is checked yes. So somebody thought something was happening at one time. Maybe it's been changed.
That was, I believe,
dated January 22nd.
So we submitted an updated EAF as part of our current submission.
Okay, and that was changed?
No, I have the updated one. It's not changed.
Okay.
So can you just refer me to the number?
It's page 2. It's item 13B.
It has changed. I'm looking at it. The 13A is yes, but 13B is no.
You got changed? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I was looking at the top of the page. Okay, so that's been changed.
All right. That was just oversight the way this was filled out.
Yeah, and again, we used the EAF mapper this time, and in certain instances, it was auto-completed. And again, Ms. Evans can speak to those issues regarding the proximity to the river.
Dam autocorrect.
And then,
yeah. So I guess the next issue that HCZM had raised in their memo is the limited phase 2 that was recommended as part of the phase 1. And I will take responsibility for that. I don't think I was incredibly clear with HCZM when we had that initial dialogue. The reason why, because when I said limited, I was quoting the language in the phase 1, and the phase 1 referred to it as a phase 2 because it was limited only to the extent there may have been any sort of contamination related to those tanks on the site. but it's not meaning that there isn't going to be soil testing. And the phase one actually recommends doing that soil testing to ensure that there wasn't any leaching, which I think is what the HCZM was concerned about. So what the phase one actually recommends and what the applicant does intend to do would mitigate any potential concerns. I think it was just a miscommunication.
Can we back up a little bit and then,
Sure.
Ms. Adana, if you can't do it, perhaps one of the team members can just describe this whole phase one, phase two thing that we're talking about here. You know, the HCZM memo talks about previous use of the building and possible, there's 2 above ground tanks. Are there any in-ground tanks is a question. And environmental testing of the soil or anything below the slab. So why doesn't somebody please explain to us what it is that you're proposing to do in phase one?
So the phase one was already done. The phase one was
done. Okay.
And we actually provided that to the board. It's a very lengthy document, so I believe it was a link. I could certainly provide the project summary, which is just the first few pages, which gives an overview, which may be more helpful to the board rather than sifting through hundreds of pages of just numbers. But so,
well, if you provided it to us, we should have it here. Let's see, what's the date on the document?
it's the final inspection date, issue date was March 30th. I can try to find it on, oh, it's on your list of agenda items. It's part of the April 17th submission. It's called phase one. And there's an email from my client.
Okay.
But it looks like it's not picking it up. So
yeah, I think the link is dead on there.
Oh no.
But we do have it.
Okay, I'm just looking at the documents I've downloaded for this particular project, and I can't lay my hands on it quickly.
So just to respond to your question, Chair, there were, as far as I'm aware, based upon the review, it does look at whether there are underground storage tanks or above ground storage tanks. And the only tanks that were identified in the phase one were the 2 above ground storage tanks in the cellar, which are going to be removed as part of the recommendations in the phase one. So those are going to be removed. And then there will be the additional testing that will be done on site in order to ensure that as a result of the previous use and those above ground storage tanks that were on the site, that there was no contamination. And then if there was, obviously further remediation would be needed to the extent necessary. And that's all outlined in the phase one. And again, we can provide you with a hard copy. But so I think the confusion was from the fact that it was called a limited phase 2, and that's just because it was only with respect to any potential contamination related to those above ground storage tanks, which will include soil testing. But there were no other potential issues found during the phase 1 that would warrant a more expansive phase 2.
All right, I think I understand better. I understand the issue better.
And they also recommended getting an asbestos inspector survey of the building to ensure there's no asbestos, and if so, have that removed properly, any lead-based paint, those types of things that will certainly also be done by the applicant during the renovation process.
HCCMC was also talking about that there was a potential that stormwater couldn't be controlled. Do we have definitive engineering that most likely it can be?
I mean, based upon, Mr. Stein.
Yeah, I can comment on that. Right now, the stormwater isn't being controlled. All the stormwater from the building, from any of the paved areas, is running overland, going directly into the stream with no treatment, with nothing. And the proposed condition, we're collecting all the runoff from the roof, from the interior parking area, putting it through a mechanical separator, so it's basically cleansing the water, and then connecting into the village's system where it discharges controlled through the village's own pipe.
Okay, so that concern seems to be addressed.
Yes.
Okay.
And Mr.
we have-
Stein,
Sorry?
I'm sorry, Mr. Stein, if I believe I remember correctly that the capacity of the village's pipe was looked at and it's adequate to receive anything coming from this site?
Yes, one of the comments though is that requesting that we televise and investigate just the condition of the existing piping to make sure there's no issues in that line. If we need to make any improvements, similar to 172 East Prospect where we had to replace some lines, we went through it.
So I guess if Ms. Evans could talk about the waterway and all of the buffer and the wetland and all that information.
Yes, I would be happy to. I was asked to review the HCCMC memo, and in that memo, they say that the project involves disturbance of wetlands. It's 44, the property is in a wetland or a wetlands buffer, and any work must protect the wetland or the wetland buffer to the maximum extent possible. According to the village's code for wetland protection, watercourses are not defined. They are not included, as many municipalities do, in the definition of a wetland. Watercourses are not included. And in fact, it says that the areas 2,500 square feet or larger that comprise hydric soils or inundated or saturated by surface water, groundwater at a frequency and duration sufficient to support, and I'm going to skip ahead, hydrophytic vegetation as defined in the federal manual from 1989. There are no wetlands on this site or immediately adjacent to this site. The Mamaroneck River is a watercourse that is defined by steep banks in this area, and so the project site itself does not have wetlands on it or adjacent to it. So it sounds like semantics, but in this case, it is the way the code is written. So the stormwater improvements that Mr. Stein described, I believe will improve the long-term impacts that this property has on the river, and the landscape plan that was prepared to use native vegetation in the area immediately adjacent to the river bank will also improve what is there currently, which is mostly invasive vegetation and other structures that probably are no longer used.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member of the planning board have any questions for the applicant?
Since Mr. Holt is present, was he going to do give us some overview of the traffic concerns we had?
Yeah, I can provide an overview of our report. Just for the record, Carlito Holt with Provident Design Engineering. So we prepared a traffic and site distance study dated May 11th of this year. And one of the items that we focused on is the amount of additional trips that the proposed project would generate as compared to the existing use. And what we determined is that during the peak AM, peak PM, and peak Saturday roadway hours, you would generate a total of 2 to 4 additional trips during those peak hours. Therefore, the project is a very nominal increase in traffic, and you wouldn't even notice the amount of traffic it's generating on the background traffic already out on the roadway. With respect to the site distance, we did a site distance analysis and compared that to the standards published by the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials. So for the speed posted along Phillips, along Phillips Park Road, you would assume a 35-mile-per-hour design speed. AASHTO identifies a minimum stopping sight distance of 250 feet. So looking to the left out of the proposed driveway, you can see in excess of the 250 feet. Looking to the right out of the driveway, you see up to the intersection up at Spencer Place, where traffic would be coming down Prospect via a turning movement. So it's already coming down at a low speed, so it wouldn't have any issue with conflict of vehicles turning out of that driveway. That was essentially the two main findings.
Mr. Holt, when you did the study, you said that it was done in May?
We submitted the report in May.
Oh, when was the study done of the traffic? Because I know a lot of people in Village use that to cut through. So this wasn't taken during the pandemic, was it?
Well, this study didn't do any traffic counts. The purpose of this study was to do a trip generation analysis to determine how many new trips this project would generate compared to the existing use. And the amount of trips that it would generate, being 2 to 4 trips during a peak hour, that in the industry is considered a very extremely nominal amount of additional trips that wouldn't warrant any additional analysis of intersections. You wouldn't notice any change in operations due to those amount of trips.
And that's considering both the residential use and the proposed commercial use of a retail store of some sort being there?
Correct.
And what about the parking for the retail store?
The parking for the retail store would continue to be provided in the parking that is currently off of the Spencer Place parking lot, where there is an easement for off-street parking to support the use that's there today.
So
That parking is sufficient to support that amount of retail.
And there's a sidewalk for people to come around on Phillips Park Lane to the store? How would they get to the store?
I believe we're proposing to make improvements to the sidewalk outside of the property.
Okay.
I don't think there's any direct access from those parking spots, just so you know. So you'd have to walk out of the parking lot and around. But there is, public parking, and that's why there is no parking requirement for retail in the downtown.
Well, the question is, if someone's coming to the store, they have to park in the, the back lot there, or on the side pocket lot that he just described, and cross over Phillips Park Lane in an area where commuters come a lot.
Yeah, so they've got the parking spaces on the property next door that are deeded to them. And then they also have the Spencer lot, which is across the street, the public parking Spencer lot across the street, which I think you're referring to.
Okay. And there's no proposed parking spaces in front of the building? Are there spaces right there? There's some spaces against the guardrail.
Further down Phillips Park, but along the frontage, there's no public parking.
And none is proposed?
That would be, I think that's the village's right of way. So that would be something the village would have to undertake.
There's no parking on that side.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, there's no parking anytime currently.
Okay.
The road kind of narrows in that location.
Right.
I have sort of a procedural question. I was looking at the materials, and I just want to make sure that the applicant here is here for site plan and a special permit. What is the special permit? That's chapter 342-50?
Yeah, the residential use in a commercial district.
Okay, so I need to understand how chapter 240-30 planning board permit required impacts any of this conversation. And if it does, there's some difference in the language that I'm not sure is conformed. So
well, my understanding is that right now, based upon the village code amendments that were adopted in August of 2019, the village board precluded, and Greg, please correct me if I'm speaking out of turn, precluded the planning board from granting that permit under 240, under chapter 240. I believe there is currently a proposal that the village board is considering to revise that local law, but I'm not exactly sure where that is in the process.
Well, so my reading of 240-30 talks about, in addition to all other required permits and approvals, a permit from the planning board shall be required for any building, structure, or parking area otherwise requiring subdivision or site plan approval that is wholly or in part hereafter constructed, altered, enlarged, or enclosed within 50 feet of the mean high water line of Long Island Sound or any body of water which flows into Long Island Sound. That's not a problem as long as the applicant can show that the building, structure, or parking area is water dependent, which I think we're not, or cannot reasonably be located elsewhere on the property. That cannot reasonably be located is only in the chapter 240-30, it's not in 342-50. So I don't understand, and maybe we need a legal opinion from our attorney, how we marry these two requirements that seem to be applicable to this project. Unless I'm looking at the wrong section of the code, which is possible, but I just took it off the website recently, so I think it's up to date.
Okay, so the part that's being enlarged is not within 50 feet of the river. I think is what.
Yeah, that's a little tenuous to me. For any building, structure, anyway, I don't read it that way, but I'm not going to argue about that here. But I would like a clarification on that. It's not the encroachment we're talking about. The building is being altered. So I don't see how they don't need the permit under 240-30. And so maybe they need two permits. I don't know, but I would like that clarified at some point soon.
Well, we're not doing any there. Yes, the building is being altered, but no portion of the building that is within that 50-foot setback. And if you look at the way that the structure and the extent is designed, it was very intentionally laid out that way in order to not be within that 50 feet.
I appreciate that, but that's not how I read the statute. So I think we need to look at it.
The first floor of the building, the existing building, is within the 50 feet, and that is being altered, correct?
Not the portion that is within 50 feet.
We're not doing anything to alter the interior of that building?
Interior, but my understanding is that the exterior will remain the same. It's not going to move closer to the water, and that portion is not going up. So there's nothing that's being enlarged or altered that's within the 50 feet on the structure.
But again, that's not how the code reads.
I think we understand.
So I just need clarification on that.
Well, we did, I believe you raised this in March, and so the building inspector, that was part of the reason why he did issue that subsequent memo dated March 30th to address the existing structure and the fact that because we were not doing work with the 50 feet, it did not increase the nonconformity. So I believe the building inspector has already provided that clarification.
I would like to hear that from our attorney.
Okay. If the board agrees, of course.
Thank you.
Also, a roof terrace being put on the existing building for the use of the residential tenant? Does that not count as an alteration?
Well, the existing, it's just an enclosure, so nothing is being added onto it other than, I guess, fencing. Again, you know, we tried to design this in a way that would comply with the code. It was presented to the building inspector, and he seemed satisfied, so that's what we're working off of.
I guess my question is, what is
that's the question? No, I don't think that's the question. I think, and Cindy, please correct me if I understand this properly. Right now, we are considering a special permit under the section of the code 342-50. Your reading of the code 342-30 states that another permit should be applied for and reviewed based on the fact that the structure that is within the 50 feet is being altered in some way. So the question is, what does altered mean?
Yeah, and also 34250 says that the planning board may not grant a permit under section 240-30.
You can't grant the permit under that section.
This is why we need our lawyer to clarify.
I'm so confused now. I thought I got it, but I didn't get it.
I
So,
think that's understandable.
We only spent 2 years working on this law. So.
Yeah.
but you can't leave until you fix it.
See, but, okay, so I have to say, Greg, what you read was right, but you have to continue the sentence.
Yeah.
May not grant a permit under 240-30 for development unless the building, structure, or parking garage is water dependent.
Yes.
So this is why we have a problem. We're precluded under 342-50 from issuing any permit unless it's water dependent. Obviously, this is not water dependent. So I have two different code sections that are contradicting each other, I think.
Yeah, so the intention of that section was to basically say there is no 240-30. If you're building an infill housing development, you cannot build within 50 feet of the river. That's it. And now the board is reviewing, obviously, creating some kind of special permit to allow you to build within 50 feet of the river. But the intention at the time, and what this code is trying to say is you can't build anything within 50 feet of the river. If it's infill housing, you can't do it.
And that's great. I want to know what we have to work with today.
Okay, so it sounds like we need clarification between the apparent contradiction between two sections of the code. Is that summing this up without me?
Yes, please.
Not explaining it properly?
That's why I don't want to speculate anymore. I want an opinion.
Okay, so it sounds like this project also, the secret determination is on hold until we get some clarification about the codes that apply to it. Is that a fair statement?
That is fair.
I'm sorry, applicant. Okay.
I would just
We
say,
don't write the laws, we just have to live by them.
and we are just, I don't want to go.
That's okay. You don't have to say anything.
Necessary, but I think, if the board could appreciate that the way it was designed was intending to try to comply with this, and we did, we
I think we understand that. We all
initially,
delivered
and
the
we-
original proposal for the site.
right.
Right. Okay, so it sounds like we are sort of stopped as far as how far we can go on this. Is that?
If I could just ask, are there any other issues that the board has, or if you're, or for any of our consultants that are here, since we are here, and we would like to try to move this along to the extent we can once we can get that clarification and information for you.
I just want to reference the planning memo that we received from the county planning board dated March 27th. You probably have a copy of it, and they make some suggestions.
Yes.
With regards to, making sure that there's recycling and unbundled parking, which I had to understand what that meant.
That's something we can consider.
Yes, and also having power supply for charging of e-bikes, some green building technology. I mean, I think we're talking about some plantings on the roof, but if there's anything else that the applicant is considering or will consider, and the architect is here as well, that's important to bring up to us as far as sustainable building technology.
It's also required under 342.
I was going to say that. That's part of our code as well. So if you could just review once more that memo, it did come 2 months ago. But if there's anything that you need to address, we will be looking, making sure that we're preparing for the future in projects here in the village.
Certainly.
Right.
Anybody else?
There's a member of the public.
Okay, so, yes, this is an open public hearing, so,
Greg, I had a question before, since she was asking if there's any other questions. And I know that Mr. Mendez was asking questions about the facade and the facade treatment. And I know because applicants in the past have gone back and forth between the planning board, the zoning board, and Harbor Coastal Zone Management is, can we see what the latest facade plan is? Because I know things change after they go from board to board. So you know, we've had problems with things getting lost in the shuffle, as you know.
you forgot BAR.
Yeah, I don't think they've been to,
Right.
I don't believe they've been to BAR yet. So that's something.
Sorry, I believe we're on the agenda for next week. So when we come back, we should be able to give you an update on any comments we received from that board.
Okay.
Hey, Greg.
Is that everybody from the board?
I keep hearing Dominic come in and out. I don't know if he's trying to say something. You can unmute yourself if you'd like.
Hear me now?
Yes.
Hey, Greg. Hi, good evening, board. Dominic Brescia, applicant. Just a quick question. Can we proceed to the Harbor Coastal zoning to address the issues that Cindy has brought up this evening? They had told us that they require secret determination before you know, we go back to them, but it sounds like I like to address those issues so that when we come before this board, you have a comfort level of hearing that they've been discussed, addressed, etc.
You can make a request for additional preliminary review, but they cannot take any action until seeker is complete. So they can't do a consistency determination until the lead agency, which is the planning board, issues a negative declaration.
Okay, understood. Greg, another question is when we had that preliminary meeting at the regatta with Mr. Sposino, we had discussed the approach to not, you know, get, you know, work around the 50-foot setback, and we abandoned ship on the prior application because of it. Mr. Sposino didn't have any problem with this at all. We had a roundtable meeting. Everybody was there. You were present, Greg, and he kind of said that we're in, you know, we're in a as of right scenario with this. So I'm just not understanding what has been brought up tonight as far as, you know, what the concern is. Can you just spell that out to me?
I don't think that's for me to do. I think the board has made their comments with respect
Well,
to those
they're
two
asking for an
provisions of
opinion
code.
or interpretation from council on this. And again, that's how I walked away from that table, saying that, no, you know, we would be okay to proceed in this manner. Again, I'm confused. And if they're going to depend on a legal interpretation, I just, they're going to go back to Mr. Sposino? Is Christie going to just look into this for the village? How's this going to work? I'm just trying to understand the mechanics of it.
I am going to look into it with Mr. Sposino. I was at that meeting as well. I don't in particular remember what his comments were on the application at this time, and I also can't speak for him. So I am going to adhere to the board's request and look into it myself again with Mr. Sposino's assistance. And, you know, at the next meeting, hopefully we'll have a memo ready for the planning board.
Okay. Thank you, Christie. All right. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Greg, you said we have a member of the public who would like to speak.
That is correct. Okay. Glenn, you are on.
Yeah, just to speak quickly, the 50-foot provision that was put into the law was actually something added at the last minute, not well thought out, and the trustees are currently struggling with it. I do think you're going to have a interpretation that is very restrictive on it. I would urge the applicant to actually go to a Board of Trustees meeting and give input, because as the members of this board have indicated, the trustees are looking to amend the 50-foot law as it stands right now, and it might behoove this applicant to go before the trustees and see if that, if they can have input to make it easier for them to make this legal and to in fact go through with their application. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Again, just raise your hand if you'd like to make a comment on the application. Okay, not seeing any hands raised.
Okay, we'll keep the public hearing open. Ms. Mason will work on trying to sort out the conflicting code for us. And once we have some clarity as to which laws apply, we can move forward, hopefully with SEQA. Seems like we have a theme going here tonight.
Well, once we get everything in order, we'll probably just knock out SECR on a whole bunch of applications at one time. So we'll make a lot of progress very soon.
I'm gonna blame Greg. Jinxing us, and he's put out, because of his leaving, it's his last meeting. Like, we can't get anything done. What are we gonna do without you?
And we can't have cake. So the whole thing is a bust.
Yeah, and we can't even have a toast because I guess we didn't think of it.
We could.
But before we adjourn the meeting, I just want to thank Greg. I've worked with you for about 2.5 years now. It's been a pleasure. I think I've seen you mature in your job, which I think was a good thing. I enjoyed watching that. Since I've had a few months working with you more closely, since I became chief, I certainly have come to rely on you, and I really appreciate all your help and your work with this board, and me particularly. And we'll miss you, and good luck in Scarsdale.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's been a pleasure working with all of you. And, you know, I hope the best for the village, which I am still a resident of. So
That's right. You're not going far. When this is over and the bar's open again, maybe we can have that drink. Yeah, right.
Yes, I'll hold you to it.
We know where you live. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
All right. I need a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second.
We had to do that, right? We did. All right. We'll just do a group vote. All in favor during the meeting?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg.
Greg, good luck.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thanks.
Good luck.
Thank you for
Good
your time
night.
this evening. Good luck, Greg.